Hello everyone, my name is Stanley St. Rose, and today we're going to be talking about Life in the Iron Mills, written by Rebecca Harding Davis. Now, before I go into summary analysis of this work, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. This short story by Rebecca Harding Davis is very sad, very depressing. It's not. I mean, it gives us somewhat of a happy ending, but not really. It really looks at America's underbelly within the 19th century, and how life was for certain immigrants, and in many cases, how life is still like within the 21st century for a lot of immigrants. So we get an account, a story of this man by the name of Hugh Wolf. Hugh Wolf is an immigrant. Within this short story, he's living in a house with several different families, and himself, his father, and his cousin Deborah. They all live in this. They live in cellars of the cellars of this house. Which, if you think of a cellar is usually a place where you store things. You don't really live there. And these individuals, they're immigrants. They don't have that much money, so they're pretty much living wherever they can afford, and life is just horrible for them. Hugh Wolf works within this town, this city, and he's pretty much making iron, or he's tending to iron, the process of making iron, and it's just not pleasant. The story goes into the detail of how you make iron, but the general idea is he's working in a place, in a factory where it's extremely hot. Within this story, they mention this factory. It kind of feels like Dante's Inferno because of how hot it is, and the fire, and the ash, the soot, and just how hellish and warm and fiery. And you have these men working day and night in the midst of this fire, and they're doing their jobs. They're making iron. It's just not pleasant. It's not fulfilling work. You work as hard as you can. You're working 10, 12 long days. You're not getting paid a lot. You're pretty much just working to survive. And Hugh Wolf, he's been doing this for so long that he's kind of like not happy with his life. There's no joy in it. There's no beauty in it. There's no love. There's nothing. Him and his father, they don't have any other funds. And this whole story just paints a picture of this city where most of the people who live in the city are poor. They're working backbreaking jobs from sunrise to sunset and even more. And they don't really have futures, and pretty much what we're told of their lives. Again, this was written in the 19th century, so you could imagine that life expectancy wasn't that long, and that comes into the play of this short story. And Hugh Wolf is he's just going through the motions. He's going through his life. Now, one thing that is very fascinating is that he makes sculptures out of coal, or coral. Sorry, coral. He makes sculptures out of coral, and that's a byproduct or a waste product that you get from making iron. And so, pretty much, Hugh Wolf, he's talented because he can make sculptures. He's a sickly man. He has tuberculosis. He's not that strong. He doesn't have big muscles. He's working hard. He's not again, the 19th century is plagued with alcohol. So these men that are working in these mills, they work hard all day, and then they drink to get by, or to forget the plights of their lives. Because in the 19th century, there was a lot of hard work in America. You didn't get paid high wages. You didn't have high wages. The men worked hard. They drank harder. And that's how they got through it. I mean, life was just, especially within the town that we encounter within the short story, life was dreary. It's dark. It's dusty and ashy. And I mean, people are sleeping on ash heaps. They're sleeping on piles of coats. They were sleeping in cellars. So I mean, you just didn't have luxury, and so Hugh Wolf, life is just there's no joy in it, and he keeps on dreaming, just like I guess everybody else in this town. Everyone dreams of better days, and we meet Deborah. Deborah is this the cousin of Hugh Wolf. Of course, she lives in the cellar with Hugh and his father. We also meet a girl by the name of a little girl that her father goes to prison, and she ends up staying with them, and so her story is quite sad too. Her name is Janie, and she pretty much comes into the story just to show us the side, like how these towns and these cities and these industrialism, how it even affects children. So these are individuals, Americans who pretty much live at the bottom of the barrel, Americans that are just, breaking their bones, breaking their backs to make ends meet. And it's not just the adults, it's the children, especially within the 19th century. Children didn't have the rights that they have now in the 21st century. Pretty much kids were drinking too within the 19th century. It wasn't, everybody drank to get by. Deborah is Hugh Wolf's cousin, and she's in love with him within this work. I'm guessing that was normal within the 19th century. And pretty much she had this love for him, and she always wanted, for him to recognize the love that she had for him. But Hugh pretty much, in a way, didn't reciprocate it because, first of all, well, she believes that's because her deformity, because she has a little bit of a hunchback. And to me, I think that might be because of inbreeding, because, that's just my perspective. The short story doesn't specifically say that, but, just by her, loving her cousin, it kind of makes you think about inbreeding, and maybe that's something that's went on in her family. And maybe that's why she has a hunchback. That's just my perspective. So she's not a pretty woman. She's not a beautiful woman. And again, I feel like that might be because of inbreeding. And Hugh doesn't profess his love for her. She does within the work profess her love, but it's not reciprocated. So the work goes on, and one night while Hugh is working, Deborah brings him food, brings him supper. He eats it even though he wasn't hungry. Then they Hugh sees a bunch of rich people, or Kirby, the owner of this mill comes in, or the son. He comes in, and he's managing the men, right? He's the one that's responsible for paying the men, and basically, he gets into a conversation. So he comes into the mill with a party of people. He comes in with a doctor. He comes in with a journalist, and they're kind of like talking about the plight of people. They talk about the social ladder, that anybody can make it in America, that anybody can become wealthy, that anybody can reach success. It's a social ladder that you have to climb, and it's not their responsibility to make life better for any one person. They wish that they could make your life better for everybody, but it's not their responsibility. Kirby's like, man, I'm just here to pay these individuals. They work hard, I pay them, and that's it. I'm not responsible for their well-being or whatever. The doctor, they see one of the sculptures that Hugh Wolf made. It's a woman that's crouching down, and she's kind of like, it symbolizes a hunger for life, because she's hungry, but she's not hungry for food. She's hungry for life, and Hugh explains this to them. He approaches them and explains this to them, and they're very surprised by his work, by his craftsmanship, and how he sculpted this woman that has meaning to it. And he asked them for help. They said that he has real talent and that he should explore being an artist. But when he asked them to help him, they say no. And Deborah ends up stealing from them. And then this is where everything gets dark, because Hugh gets caught. At first he spends a long time thinking about whether or not he should give the money back to its original owner, or to keep it for himself, but he ultimately decides to keep it for himself. And then he gets caught, and they blame him of theft. And he gets sentenced to 19 years in prison, and that's the maximum sentence that was allowed at the time. This is the 19th century. People don't live that long. In 19 years is it's a long time, especially when people are not living that long. There's medical care. It's the 19th century. I mean, medical care is not as advanced as it is today. So, and this man already had tuberculosis, so he was already weak to begin with. So he could, everybody knew that he was probably not going to make it through 19 years in prison. He plays with a piece of tin. Everybody cast judgments. Society cast judgments on him. His name was on the newspaper. All of this broke out in the newspaper. The rich individuals that visited the factory, they judged them, they ridiculed him, and they locked him up. And pretty much, he's stuck in his cell. They actually take Deborah too, so she gets charged too. She gets sentenced to 3 years. We don't go through the trial or anything like that. It's just they get caught, they get charged, they're sent to prison. Deborah gets 3 years, he gets 19, and it's heartbreaking because these individuals, they were just at the bottom of the barrel. Their lives were going nowhere. They just there's nothing they could have. They just wanted a way out. They wanted a way to see a better life, to live a better life, and they just chose the wrong path. It just ended badly for them. So pretty much while he's in his cell, Hugh Wolf pretty much takes this piece of tin, and he starts cutting at the bars of the windows of his cell. And people think that maybe he was trying to break out and kind of cut the bars, but he wasn't really trying to do that. He just made his mind to commit suicide. So he sharpens this piece of tin on the bars. Deborah comes in to see him one last time in his cell. Well, she leaves her cell. She begs for permission. She leaves her cell, goes to his cell, profess her love to Hugh, and Hugh just, doesn't really react over this. Or, they're both in jail at this point, so there's nothing could be done. And he has 19 years, so, his death is he's just looking towards his death now. So, all of this happened. Hugh says to her to tell Janie and his father, tell them I say goodbye, and that's the end of my life. He reflects on his life. He looks out on the streets. He spends some times in his cell looking out on the street, looking at the people, thinking about their lives, thinking about what they're going to do with their lives, thinking about if they're married, if they have kids, what kind of jobs they have, what kind of futures they're in store for. So he does things here and there to kind of busy himself, to think about just reality. He sharpens his piece of tin, and then ultimately he cuts his arm and commits suicide and dies. Coroner comes in, Kirby comes in, and newspapers come in. They, everybody's sensational. All the journalists comes in. Media explodes, this, that, and the third, and then the coroner buries the body out in the country, not in the city, so it's kind of like an escape for his dead body. And then 3 years later, after Deborah finishes up her sentence, this coroner, or I would say a Quaker. So the Quaker comes in and kind of takes over and helps Deborah find hope and a fulfillment of life, or achieve a better life through Christianity. We get this last scene of the coral statue of the woman pleading for life, or pleading for a better life. That statue survives. It stays with the Quaker woman, and it's a symbol of kind of it goes towards God, it goes towards Christianity, but at the end it kind of feels like it's the way that Hugh Wolf lives on, because it's all he ever wanted. He always wanted to live a better life. He always wanted to just find some upward mobility. And that's a critique of society. That's a critique of reality. That's a critique of the world. There'll always be more individuals who are poor than who are rich. And I think the more that there's a gap between the rich and the poor, and there's no way for the people at the bottom to reach upward mobility, stories like this will always exist, and they will always be in the world. I mean, every day, if you look for it, if you watch several news sources, you're going to find stories like this of people who are down on their luck, people who are the poorest or who are down in society. They just meet their ends quickly and horrifically, and in a sad matter, in a melancholy matter, and it's very sad and depressing, and it shows you how some certain people are very lucky to have the lives that they have. And also at the same time, it's when you're wealthy and rich and you have power, it's easier to cast down judgment and to judge people, because Kirby and the doctor and the newspaper individual that came into the factory, they were like, man, these people could live better lives. They don't have to work in Dante's Inferno or in this factory, in this hell. Their lives should be better. But they're really not. They can talk about it. They can judge them. They can judge their realities, but they're never going to help them. So a lot of people can talk the talk and say how things can be better. But when it comes to, rolling up your sleeves and doing something about it, most people just back away. So in terms of so at the end, Deborah, serves her sentence. Then she gets released. She goes out into the country and she becomes a Christian. And then, Hugh Wolf just dies. His story ends badly. His story ends sadly. And his story is really similar to every other man or to this whole city, because all of the men, they might not end up dying in prison like you did, but still their lives are grim, and they're on their deathbeds too, because they're already in hell. Because they call the factory within this work hell. They call it Dante's Inferno, and Dante's Inferno is hell. And these men, day and night, are working in hell, working, making iron, and whiskey is their only escape. Drinking is their only escape. And again, I've said this several times on this channel that the 19th century is just plagued with alcohol. I mean, women were getting beaten. Domestic violence was high. Men would come home drunk and just they have no control over themselves, because alcohol was not heavily regulated back then. Alcohol was not just, today alcohol, every bottle is inspected, is regulated. There are laws and policies for every beverage. But back then it wasn't like that at all. So a lot of people, when they got drunk, they really got drunk. It wasn't a joke. So, in terms of deeper meaning, in terms of analysis here, this work is just, it shows you the plight of women within the 19th century, and how backbreaking, grueling work they had to go through. I think if you're a woman today, you should be very happy and just very grateful, because in the past, for a woman, there wasn't that many job opportunities. There was no such thing as equality. There's no such thing as you having your own rights. You just had, especially if you're in the poorer classes, you kind of had to rely on a man. You couldn't rely on yourself. There were few jobs for women. And the whole thing with love and bright futures, it was pretty much something not many, because a lot of people in the past used to love the idea of that white picket fence with the house and the family and the kids and the car, and a lot of people dream about that life, but it's rare that people reach that goal. That's why for most people it's just a dream, right? So Deborah is, her story ends up better than Wolf's, but at the same time, the dirtiness and the mechanicalness of this city, of this town, it feels like no one in the town or in the city is human or living, because it's all about making money. It's all about wealth. It's all about upward mobility. And it comes to the point where Kirby, the owners, the workers, the people, the functions of the town, it just becomes a machine and a chore, and there's no emotions or passions in it, and just it just becomes talking about the Industrial Revolution, it just becomes tasks, because people were dying left and right, policies were lacking and weak. And people were just doing whatever they could to survive, and if they couldn't, they just died. And most people wouldn't care. I mean, they would throw them in a hole, bury them. Maybe somebody would say a few prayers or sing a few songs, and then they continued. I mean, there wasn't enough time to take a pause. Life doesn't stop when someone dies. So the media probably stayed on Wolf's death for a day or two, and then they went back to normal, if even. So it's a fascinating story. It really makes us look at the plight of women. The plight of women, what they had to go through, and just poor people in general in these industrial towns. Because living in a cellar is not fun. Living without love is not fun. Having no future and just working in hell is not fun. It's not anything that anybody have ever looked for. And it's just the only escape for these people. Even the narrator says within this work that, in the beginning, because Deborah was not drinking whiskey, and the narrator was like, I don't know why this woman is not drinking whiskey, because it's the only way to get through this. It's the only way to get through this horror and the hell of living in a town, in a city, in an industrial complex such as this. So, very fascinating work. I think you do get, a beauty within the sculpture of Wolf. And it's a piece of hope, because even though he died, his work lived on, and his hope lived on through his sculpture. So that art there really gives us hope for not just him, but for women, because I think women throughout the centuries have been crying out for equality and for the ability to be counted as human beings with full rights, and the ability to be themselves, the ability to live. Because for the longest time, women only had one choice, was that to be mothers and to have kids, and that was the only thing that society allowed them to do. If they didn't have kids, and if they didn't take care of the home, there was no life for them. So this work is just very fascinating, very fascinating. But that's all I had to say about this work. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.